Welcome back to Sabbath School Boot Camp. It's a new quarter, and you know what that means. We have a new study guide. We're going to finish out the year talking about education with a guide written by some of Adventism's top educators. But a new quarter also means we've upgraded some stuff in the bunker here, so let's begin with this. Welcome back to Sabbath School Boot Camp. Our mission is to help you think creatively and critically about your Sabbath school lesson. So let's get in the bunker and get going. We're going to start by talking about what is new here on Sabbath School Boot Camp. We've thought long and hard for about 5 minutes about how to make these boot camp videos more impactful as you prepare to teach this Sabbath school lesson. One of the new segments we have is the lesson summary, which we'll get to in a minute. I will give you a 1 or 2 sentence statement about what this lesson is covering. Sometimes we get into these lessons and we're on Wednesday wondering, what is this week about again? Plus, if you get asked to teach Sabbath school at the last minute and you've literally got 30 seconds to brush up on the lesson, this summary will help launch you into the class. The second new segment are the probes. The probes are 1 or 2 or 3 good, solid discussion-starting questions to help get the conversation rolling in your class. Especially in an age of COVID where half of your class might be online, you really need some great questions to break the ice and get it all started. Let's begin with the summary. Here it is. God created Eden as a classroom for Adam and Eve, but they began listening to another teacher, a snake, and now we have a hard time telling the difference between good knowledge and bad knowledge. And here are your probing questions to get your class talking. First, the whole earth was beautiful. Why do you think God created a garden to teach Adam and Eve in? Compared with that garden, how do you think having school in a building with fluorescent lights and hard chairs changes the way that we learn? Second question. If you could go back in time to this moment where Eve stood before the snake and you could just freeze that moment and talk with Eve, what would you tell her? How might you try to convince her that some knowledge just isn't worth gaining? Go deeper on that previous question for question number 3. How do we know the difference between good and bad knowledge? Is some bad knowledge worth having? For instance, is there some benefit to touching a hot stove or falling off your bike that can, in the long run, help you? Okay, sliding over to Sunday, we're talking about the Garden of Eden as the first school. Adam and Eve were perfect, right? So why did they need school? Why did they need to learn? For starters, they didn't know the names of the animals. Adam apparently had to come up with those names. Adam also didn't know he needed Eve at first either. He learned that when he was naming the animals, saw that they all had pairs and he didn't. Moral perfection doesn't mean you know everything. Adam and Eve had to discover the world they found themselves in. Notice that God didn't tell Adam, dude, you need to move out of the house and get married. Rather, God placed Adam in a situation where he would discover this for himself. God too is learning, it seems. Genesis tells us that God brought the animals to Adam to see what he would name them. What God is learning here is probably not so much the animals' names, but he's seeing how Adam thinks, how he speaks, how his mind turns. God and Adam were getting to know each other. The act of naming is a divine act. God breathed creation and then named it good. By allowing Adam to name the animals, God is allowing Adam to step into God's shoes. So the type of education that goes on in the garden is very intimate, personal, experiential. There's no walls and only one rule: don't eat from a certain tree. Moving over to Monday, we discover that Eden High has another teacher, the snake. The snake is apparently confined to that one tree that Adam and Eve are not allowed to hang around, but he's still allowed in the garden. God didn't create a bubble for Adam and Eve to live in. He didn't build a compound in the mountains of Idaho and shelter our first parents there until they were adults, and then maybe, just maybe, it might be safe enough to brave the temptations of the world. It's actually shocking how quickly God allows them to be exposed to the wrong ideas. I mean, really, God could have said, fine, Satan has the right to tempt them, but first give me 500 years with them. The serpent offers to tutor Eve in some lessons that she isn't going to learn from God. God's only teaching you one way, he tells her, but there's so much else to learn. And this introduces the idea that we need more than one teacher in life, that no one, even God, can teach us everything we need to know. That's why we have two parents, right? And grandparents and uncles and crazy cousins who all work together to teach us. God doesn't deny that the serpent taught Adam and Eve things that were true. Adam confesses to being naked, and God's response to this is, who taught you that? This snake took us from a world where God was our only teacher, where the teacher-student ratio was 1-to-1, and he put us in a world where our teachers were numerous, where now we have to decide if what we're being taught is even true. It's confusing, it's chaotic. God curses the woman, saying that her childbearing will be painful, and the man, too, will now sweat to get his food. In other words, the path toward knowledge, towards discovering the world and the life that God has made for us, will no longer be easy. Learning the right path will be harder. Now, when you want a rose, you're going to have to learn to avoid the thorns. Trotting over to Tuesday, we take another look at Eve and this snake. Notice the pedagogical tone of this conversation with the snake. The snake seems to acknowledge the supreme teaching authority of God. Did he really say you cannot eat from any tree? It's as if the snake wants to learn too. Or maybe he's suggesting, are you sure you learned your lesson correctly? Are you sure you didn't perhaps misunderstand? So, like any good student, Eve repeats her memory verse, except perhaps wishing to show off a little, she adds a bit to it. The lesson asks, besides denying exactly what God had said, what else did the serpent say that, obviously, succeeded with Eve? What principles did he take advantage of? Well, he appealed to that innocent instinct to discover and learn. In the Doctor Strange Marvel movie, Stephen Strange is told that there's a section in the library of forbidden books. Dangerous, dark, forbidden knowledge has been the theme of many stories, and it begins here in Eden. It's a way of reminding ourselves that not all knowledge is worth having. And this is the origin of lust, isn't it? Lust isn't really about sex. It's about giving into desires for knowledge and experiences that don't belong to us. The snake succeeds by taking a good, innocent thirst to understand, and then he twists it. And he does it by breaking the bond of faith between teacher and student. Did your teacher really say that? Are you sure you heard that correctly? Psh, God is just trying to hold you back. The goal was to cause Eve to doubt her own abilities, namely that she heard God correctly, but also to appeal to Eve's pride, her desire to know more than God desired to teach. And sadly, it worked. Waltzing over the Wednesday, the lesson tells us that Adam and Eve were banished from God's classroom. I don't think that's quite right. Yes, they lost Eden, the place designed for their education, but in a sense, the world now became their classroom. God wasn't done teaching them just because they lost Eden. The difference now is that nature around us sends us mixed messages. Yes, as Ellen White says in Steps to Christ, God is love is written upon every opening bud, but we also see lions killing wildebeest. Before the fall, all of creation spoke with one voice. It was univocal, telling Adam and Eve the truth about their common creator. And we still hear that voice speaking, but we also have the voice of the snake at the same time. The lesson points us to 2 Peter 1, where we are reminded that it is not too late. Peter tells us that we can still live the godly life through our knowledge of him. Because of Jesus, we can still find the knowledge of God in the world. It's just going to be a harder road now, isn't it? We need him to reveal it to us. It's going to take, as Peter says, every effort. If you have some deep thinkers and good conversationalists in your class, you might talk about the difference between good and bad knowledge. It's easy to talk about good and evil knowledge in the abstract, but what knowledge is truly bad? What things are truly not worth knowing or experiencing? How do we know where that line is? Let's be honest, God doesn't teach us everything. But does the Bible give us sufficient principles that we can use to draw that line between good and bad knowledge in every circumstance we face? What are some of those principles that we should use? Trucking over to Thursday, we find ourselves in the middle of 2 Peter 2, where we're warned about false teachers. And it's best not to get caught in the weeds of 2 Peter, okay? There's a lot going on here. Keep your class focused on a few key facts here. First, these false teachers are among the people, as Peter says, that is, in our faith community. Second, that they secretly introduce destructive heresies and think that they know better than God. In other words, there are still snakes in our gardens, aren't there? The capital F fall is something that happened in Genesis 3. But we are all in our own gardens, tempted by our own little f falls, and the promise that comes to us from God is what he would have told Eve. The Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials. So just hang on. The snakes will get what's coming to them someday, and you will get your garden back. Here's a final question you might ask your class. Who are the teachers in your life? Was it your dad? Is it your pastor? Is it Wikipedia and your friends on Facebook? Don't let your class give you a bunch of pious answers, as if they learn everything they need to know from the Bible and Ellen White. Look, if you're watching Disney Plus for 3 hours each evening, that's classroom time. We learn slang and we learn customs and traditions and things like that from movies and shows. And the goal isn't to shame people from watching Disney Plus, but to get them to think about the things that are influencing them that they may not be aware of. Well, that's all the time we've got for this week. But before we go, I want to invite you to join our Sabbath School Bootcamp Facebook group. Just search for it on Facebook, Sabbath School Bootcamp. This way, we can discuss the lesson each week, and you can tell us what teaching strategies are working for you and how things have gone. So check it out. All right, class dismissed. We'll see you next week.